Hey, it's Soul, and this is the engineering guide for the War Within. Finally. In this guide, we're going to cover gathering, and early development, including how to best cover crafting orders. We'll go over the specializations, major builds, and the unique things engineers can make for themselves and for others, but mostly for themselves. Will you invest your time into crafting bracers with high secondary stats, or maybe you want to make profession tools or the reagents that go into these crafts? I'm sure most of us wants to make a bunch of weird gadgets for ourselves and maybe sell to others, and all that's covered here. This is but one of a series of profession guides in the War Within. A playlist is available, especially an intro into the War Within professions, which I suggest watching first. A link to that is in the upper right hand corner and down in the video description. And of course, if you don't mind, like this video, share it with others if it turns out to be good, subscribe for more coverage, and of course, if there are any errors or any problems, questions, etc., let me know in a comment below. So engineering is kind of an oddball. I intended to cover this profession first because it's what I'm as a player. It just didn't feel ready to talk about until now, in fact, even just a few weeks before launch. In its current state, learning the profession is very much a kind of throw you to the wolves sort of experience. When you learn it, you get one ability, and it's to scour through scrap. As of right now, there's no quest telling you exactly what to do, and so I guess I'm your quest giver. Welcome, adventurer, to your private hell. Scrap is an essential and personal resource for engineers. It's only gathered by them. It can be found by killing mobs and rares and opening treasures, and with specializations, you can earn it from basic crafting and using tinkers. It's used for many recipe crafts, but early on, it's used for learning recipes. That makes writing this early development part of the guide kind of tricky, and I'm going to talk you through how all this works. So step one is to collect lots of scrap, which you'll do mostly through leveling and finding random treasures. Notably, the profession treasures give a healthy chunk of scrap too, and for that, I'll direct you to the Handy Notes add-on to find them all. Let's assume you have a handful of scrap for now, and we'll get to development. Scour through scrap, which is your only ability, is something you want to use once to learn the invent recipe, which has a daily cooldown to it, but it's your surefire way to max skill level, so there's no question you'll reach that point eventually. Use the invent ability for some skill points, and you'll receive a random prototype recipe. Prototypes are found from inventing and randomly found when scouring through scrap. You can use the prototype to instantly learn the recipe, and so your grind begins. By that I mean you'll be scouring through scrap to create prototypes as well as learn some basic recipes in the meantime. So you'll use prototypes as they come in. You're guaranteed to learn with these when used. If you happen to be holding on to a prototype and keep scouring or inventing, you'll randomly generate an unrecognizable prototype that pretty much performs the same function. I strongly recommend making prototypes and using them to learn recipes until you pretty much run out of recipes to learn, and the game will notify you of that. That's where disassembling inventions up here comes into play. You can disassemble unknown prototypes into more scrap and these hastily scrawled notes. Combine 15 of these to create these organized ideas, and then by using that item, you're given a random assortment of other recipes to learn, from tools to finishing reagents to a mount recipe. Did I lose you yet? Because I might have, and that's okay. You can definitely rewind until you're good. I can wait. I'm a video. Now, you don't have to go through that entire process before you can start, doing the basic stuff like leveling up and developing your profession, but I will point out a few recipes to help you level up. Now, if you can get these recipes while you're doing this whole prototype recycling kind of thing, great. You'll be on your way to at least skill level 50 without spending too much on other materials. The pausing pylon can be found via prototypes. It's cheap to make, and it can actually take you all the way to skill level 100 if you need to, but I don't suggest doing that unless you're loaded, or you need to access more spec trees, or you need a few more points for equality, or some combination of that. Just know that it's there. The big drawback is that while it's cheap, as in it doesn't use a lot of ore, it does use scrap. And the pausing pylon isn't what I'd consider to be really useful to mass produce and sell. The Bismuth Fisher Fiend is discovered by using the Organized Ideas item. Now, it's a bit more costly of a random roll, as in you'll be using a lot more scrap to try and get this recipe, but if you do, you can craft this to skill level 50 at least, and people will want fishing tools early on. You can alternatively opt for any of the other profession equipment, but everyone is capable of fishing, they're the biggest audience to work with. But at least make one of each of these tools for the first craft bonus. The more recipes you know, the easier it'll be for you to cover patron crafting orders. Engineering is a very broad profession, meaning you'll be making cloth goggles one day, mail goggles the next for these patrons. There are potion bombs and other items that need resources that you typically can't find if you're just a miner, so sometimes fulfilling orders will feel difficult, but they're very much worth it as they provide artisan acuity, knowledge points, and finishing reagents to up your crafts. The acuity will feel useful as a way to restock your patron order crafts or craft goods to sell that don't care about quality, namely your devices. Thankfully, engineering doesn't really make use of artisan acuity. You may have heard about how engineers can possibly cheese the development process by using the pilfer through parts ability. This lets you take 5 of an engineering reagent and turn it into usable scrap. This is important for crafting certain recipes. There's a specialization centered around obtaining more of it, but we can also kind of brute force the whole thing with lots of old legacy materials. So for example, and these are estimates by the way, if I happen to have 12,500 Ceravite bolts, I can process these bolts at a ratio of 5:1 and create 2,500 of this scrap for the War Within. I can then scour through this scrap to generate roughly 35 of these organized ideas to learn just about every recipe outside of a handful, more on that later. All this can be done in one sitting, although it's going to be a very long sitting, mind you. The more scrap you have, the more you have for unlocking other recipes and crafting items, and maybe doing it all over again for later patches if this is still going to be a thing. I've talked about this a lot in conversations and on stream, but I still want to warn you, this can still change before launch. This might be an early investment you're interested in, you just gotta understand the risks. Going forward, this guide will assume you're at skill level 50 and you always have scrap available when needed. As you probably know, engineering is a very selfish profession, and our first inclination is to just focus on crafting for ourselves, but there are still a few niches where engineers can shine, either on your realm or maybe on the auction house. There are 3 specializations. Engineered equipment is the place for gear, including guns, as, well, you're the only profession who can make a ranged weapon. Bracers, goggles, and profession equipment are also improved here. Devices is a pretty small tree that covers bombs, but maybe more importantly, the success of your equipped tinkers. Finally, inventing covers quite a bit by comparison, with development for your secondary stats, scrapping and pilfering, and crafting gears to customize the stats on your goggles and/or bracers. Engineering is another one of those professions where you'll need to invest points into more than one tree in order to achieve full mastery over a certain spec. So we're going to start with inventing, and I want to cover certain masteries that aren't exactly spec builds, but like everything engineering, there's just a lot of weird stuff you can do. Like, if you want to be a master scrapper, here's what you do. 10 points in the base trait and maxing out Scrapper will give resourcefulness bonuses as well as perks that give more scrap from all sources. It's not necessary if you manage to stockpile tons of scrap, but hey, it's here for the long run. But you might be interested in the trait that lets you randomly discover old Dragon Isles tinkers that work with the War Within's bracers and goggles. Unfortunately, from testing, I only saw the alarm turret and the plane displacer. There's no flamethrower, no rockets, which is kind of a bummer. On the other side here is where you can stack ingenuity, but also gain a sizable secondary stat buff whenever you invent. It's very useful for the active crafter, no matter the discipline. The base trait, by the way, provides a skill bonus for all engineering recipes. No matter what you master in this guide, you're going to be making a stop here to reach max level skill. Some of you may have learned about a craftable mount made with a lot of very expensive reagents. Using the minimum number of spec points here, you can pilfer through engineering parts to randomly collect items needed to make this mount. Now from testing, this seems to be most effective when pilfering through War Within materials. The chance of getting materials from, say, Dragonflight parts is kind of unknown at this moment because it seems to change every week. It's a chance greater than 0, but pilfering for these materials it's also very time consuming. So maybe you can consider investing here for the secondary stat buff as well as faster pilfering speed. And if you have lots of extra points, invest into some more resourcefulness, as in more parts to work with. Parts, aka reagents, might not be an attractive or flashy spec, but it might be low-key crazy gold. It's easy to master by maxing out the base trait and parts, and it's not just the reagents you'll master. This spec also happens to cover safety components and embellishments too. No idea how the embellishments compare to others, but they may turn out to be very useful. Down towards the bottom are the different stat gears specific for crafted bracers and goggles. Now, I don't recommend actually speccing into these at all, unless you have 40 points put into parts, and then just rely on the occasional spend on concentration or even a finishing reagent to avoid the cost. Let's move over to gear crafting, which is fairly straightforward. Speccing for guns directly only requires a few points, but oddly enough, you need to fully master the bottom trait to apply higher item level bonuses, missives, and embellishments unlike similar professions. You'd also need to fully master the middle trait for 5 measly skill points, which is where racial bonuses come in. With the +5 bonus, you'd be able to master the crafting of this weapon without having to spend 15 points into this trait. Now, maybe that's not a big deal in the long run, but it's one of the few times where I can actually point out a racial advantage. The same philosophy applies to bracers, and this might be something you're interested in if you want a spec that covers all possible classes. The bracers themselves might be worth it for people who want the secondary stats, but the only tinker that seems to be worth using in my opinion is the Heart-Seeking Health Injector, which heals for a lot, but it also burns away some of that healing, and it can kill you if you're not careful. When learning to spec bracers, you don't exactly learn it either. You unlock the capability of discovering them through reading ideas and choosing the gear that you want to learn. You can always hold on to a handful of these ideas, 4 in this case, to learn all of them right away. On the other side are goggles and profession equipment. Speccing for goggles works the same way as bracers, although I'd suggest only applying enough points to rank 4 this item, and then use concentration to rank 5 it for yourself or for crafting orders. If Dragonflight is any indication of traffic, we shouldn't expect a lot of it here, and you'll also learn the recipes through reading ideas. Profession gear is arguably one of the more lucrative specs in this tree. You'll need 7 reading ideas to learn all the recipes, but these will help you make high-end tools for engineering, fishing, jewel crafting and tailoring, and high-end accessories for engineering and mining. It's only a theory of mine, but something that I believe strongly. It's more important to have the bonus skill than the secondary stats, meaning maybe you don't need to apply points any further than the bare minimum, at least for now. This way you can consider pivoting and mastering a different spec before returning here to max out the secondary stats. And now for a glance at devices, the very small tree. The base traits give plus skill to bombs, tinkers, and the new jumper cables, which by the way can be used by anyone. There's no need for bracers this time. Bomb lovers can go straight down the left side to master bomb quality, proc random scrap, and learn to make a daily box of bombs. Mastering tinkers on the other side does mean maxing out the skill, but the real use of this spec I think is to lower the failure rate of your tinkers and give another opportunity to make scrap. Now let's go over tools, and as a reminder, if you spec for the secondary stat buff from inventing, invent right before you start crafting. If you're scrapping, go all in with resourcefulness on both the tool's main stats and the enchant. This is also the ideal tool for patron crafting orders and other minimal work. There's also a profession bag you can opt to use if you want to increase the number of piles of rusted scrap you get. For all your consumable and reagent/parts crafting, go multi-craft and resourcefulness for the best bang for your buck. If you're in any situation where you need to use concentration to max out a craft and you intend to do it more than a few times, roll double ingenuity to keep on crafting. So engineering's kind of a weird one. It's extremely demanding, but also easy to learn if you prepare well ahead of time. It feels like most of the fun stuff from professions overall was crammed into engineering with some of the different toys and gadgets available, but there's some very valuable crafts, especially for other crafters and mount lovers. And that's the guide. I hope this was useful, and if so, please hit the like button and share it with others. Subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live on Twitch, and again, if you have questions, you want to point out errors or whatever, please leave a comment. We're all just trying to help each other out. This is the final primary profession guide of the series, and I appreciate you for watching any of them, let alone making it to the very end of this one. So thank you. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.